Welcome to Cultimatum, the podcast uncovering the dark realities of cults and human trafficking. I'm your host, Anonymous Andrew, and each week we dive deep into the manipulation, control, and courageous escapes that define these worlds.
And I'm Melody, Andrew's co-host. Having experienced the depth of a cult firsthand, specifically the House of Yahweh, I am here as an advocate for fellow survivors.
The views and opinions expressed by our guests are their own and do not reflect the official policy or position of Cultimatum or its affiliates. The content discussed on this podcast are based on personal experiences and should not be construed as factual or legal advice. Neither the host nor the guest are liable for any statements made during the episodes. Listeners are encouraged to conduct their own research and seek professional advice where appropriate.
And before we dive into today's episode, we want to issue a trigger warning. Some episodes may cover explicit and potentially disturbing subjects such as sexual abuse, rape, human trafficking, suicide, and other sensitive subjects. Listener discretion is advised. Hey, Cultimatum fans, before we dive into today's episode, we have a quick favor to ask.
If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, could you take a moment to rate and review the show?
It really does help more people find Cultimatum and helps bring awareness to cults and human trafficking.
Thanks so much. And now let's jump into today's episode. Welcome to another episode of Cultimatum, the culture of cults and human trafficking. And my name is Anonymous Andrew, and with me this morning is my co-host Melody. Good morning, Melody.
Hello, Andrew. Today we are joined by Nicole Mafi. Nicole has built a strong presence on TikTok where she shares her story with her followers. She grew up in the Kingston clan, also known as the Order, a secretive, polygamist, incestual, Mormon-based cult in Utah. Nicole's mother was a fifth wife. Her father had 27 wives total, and Nicole is the oldest of her mother's 11 children. Today she is here to share her perspective on life inside the Order and how she's rebuilt her life since escaping. We are so excited to have you here, Nicole. Welcome to Cultimatum.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Wow, your mother had 11 children?
Yes. Yeah, but my mom actually didn't have quite as many as some of them. My dad's first wife actually had 18. So
Wow.
11 doesn't seem like a lot to me.
No.
Wow.
Okay, that's a small family in your world, right? Okay. Where shall we begin with your story?
Yeah, I'm pretty open about my story. I've been out for a while. And so I've been out for probably, I want to say, about 15 years. So it's been a long time since I've even really had a lot to do with it. I do still have contact with some of my siblings that are still in the cult. And obviously that has to be secret, right? Like, because they're not allowed to talk to people that have left. Yeah, it's been a long time. So it's very, yeah. But I guess I'll just start with, so I was born into the Order. My dad is the leader. He's still currently the leader. My mom was wife number 5. So I'm in the older generation, and I grew up when his family was actually quite small. And it was more tight knit at that point. It was like, I spent a lot more time with a lot of my siblings, a lot of my half siblings. I know that that's not common practice now. I know that they'll have little friendships in the group, but it's not really family oriented like it used to be. But as I was growing up, I started realizing it seemed like the more controlling the cult got, the more like I started realizing how much I didn't want to be there. When I was in kindergarten and first grade, I actually went to public school. It was before my dad started his own school and completely closed us off from the outside world. So I had a lot of memories of being with people outside of the community, which is not common for people now. And so when he started his own school and I started going with the Order school in second grade, that was when we were completely closed off from the outside. And then as we got more into our teenage years, we were pretty well closed off from even a lot of the community as well, because they were preparing us for marriage. And
Question. How does one just start a school? So you said your dad just started. What? I mean, you need students, you need teachers, you need a building. So can you briefly
Yeah.
describe that?
Yeah, no, that so with the homeschooling laws in Utah, and actually, so I recently moved to Missouri, and Missouri is not really strict about it either. But with the homeschooling laws, it really gives parents a lot of flexibility to pretty much do whatever they want with their kids' education. And for better or worse, right? You can say parents should have the right, parents should not have the right, but the homeschooling laws are really, really lax. So all my family had to really do was go and say that they were homeschooling us, right? And so my dad instructed all of at least his kids, and then there were other people in the community as well, to pull all their kids out of public school. And it originally started in people's houses. So I remember my mom had 4 or 5 kids at the time. I can and she would drive all over the Salt Lake Valley to get us to school every day and back because it was just at people's houses. And so when I hit 4th grade, that was when they actually got a building and they started getting their like certifications in their state. And I'm not sure exactly the process, but they got the certifications and everything to become a charter school, which is a private school in Utah. And I know that they're still functioning as a charter school right now. They've had some issues with them trying to shut it down because they're not following the laws and whatever, and all of the things that they do in the cult, right? So yeah, so now as it currently sits, the members go to their private school, and it's called Vanguard. And in fact, some of my siblings, I've heard horror stories from them going up through Vanguard, where it's not about education. They're pretty much given all the answers by the teachers just because they want to make their grades look good. So,
But being a cult leader and the state of Utah's lenient educational laws, I see how he easily started his school. Pick up where you left off. Thank you.
okay, yeah. So yeah, I was in the order school, and they got their building when I was in 4th grade, and we went, it kind of felt like a normal childhood at that point because, and I mean, and the teachers were not certified. They should not have been teaching in those classrooms in the first place. But we had as normal of a life as what you could in that environment, right?
They shouldn't have been teaching because they weren't qualified?
They were not qualified. No,
Okay.
I had kids. So, I mean, you had 14 and 15-year-olds that were teachers. And I went through the same thing. I started working full time when I was 11 years old. So working in this environment is not abnormal, right?
Uncommon, right? Okay.
Yeah. So so we went on, and then when I hit 8th grade, I really wanted to go to a public high school, and I wanted to pursue a college degree and get my education. And when I sat and talked to my father about it, he was very like, no, you're getting married, you're doing God's work, right? And at the time I wanted to go to medical school or nursing. I knew I wanted to go into the medical field. And so he enrolled me in a homeschool program. It's an online program that I've actually recommended to other people because it does allow you to just get a high school diploma without having to jump through a lot of hoops. And so I finished that program in a year. I graduated high school when I was 14 years old. And then my dad decided he was going to send a group of his girls to college for a business degree so they could learn how to do accounting, because they were running multiple businesses. They had really complicated accounting books and nobody knew how to do them, right? And so he had his group of 5 girls. 2 of them were his wives who were my age, and the other ones were his daughters, right? And so we went and did that first semester, and I remember going to college and just feeling my mind come alive. It was like I would all of the lights were out, and then when I went and sat in that college class, I was like this is more, right? And I had always been somebody that had wanted more, right? I had been through a lot of child abuse, a lot of trauma, and I wanted more. And so I did that first semester. Ironically, the order is very far right conservative. And they teach a lot of those very, I'm going to say, toxic political opinions.
It pains me to ask you this, but can you expand on the abuse you mentioned you went through? Was it sexual abuse? If you're uncomfortable talking about it, it's okay. But you said something about you went through a lot of abuse or sexual abuse, and you kind of just skipped over that. Is that a big part of your story?
Yes. So, yes, and I'm comfortable talking about it now. I've done years of therapy to work through it. In my mind now, it's common practice, the child abuse. So,
and we know that, and that's why we do these episodes, is to expose these cults, and especially the order. We know that they're very famous for that. But
yes.
I don't want to have you talk about something you're uncomfortable about, but you kind of just glazed over that. But now it makes sense. You said you've had a lot of therapy and you've worked through it.
Yeah, so a lot of those stories now, it's like, and I know, and I really feel for people that are still in their journey of really working through that trauma, because it's so painful, and it just, like, there aren't even words to describe how difficult it can be to work through that. In fact, I've had some very, very, very dark times in my life, especially right after I left. For the first, I want to say, probably 5 to 7 years, I was not okay, and I'm lucky to be alive at this point. And then my therapy started working at that point, right? Because you have to go through. So my abuse started when I was 6 years old, and I've shared it in my book, but I was gang sexually assaulted. And then it was a common practice for up until I was about 14 years old. And then at that point, I became very angry, very aggressive. And I think that was kind of a protective factor for me.
These
And
were elders, these were family members.
It's really, so just because of the lack of supervision for the children. And so, like, I was 6 years old and I was getting babysat. And it was, the first time, it was 2 boys from the order who were living next door to one of my friends. I was over at her house, and they did it to me and my cousin. And then then I was put into another childcare environment. And I don't want to say daycare, because they were not licensed, they were not legal, they should not have been running daycare. But childcare environment, right? And I had an uncle who assaulted me for that summer, the summer that I was 8 years old. And then when I was 9 or 10, so when you are assaulted in these communities, it's always the girl's fault. It's always the woman's fault. And in that situation, I was a child. So it was the girl's fault. And I just...
Who says that? And did you report it at that time and they told you it's your fault, or this is after the fact?
So at the time, I was too young to understand what was happening to me. So when I was about 10, 11, then I started, like, I still didn't understand what was happening to me, but it was so commonplace that I knew that it was happening, right? And our teachings taught us that boys and girls are not supposed to, like, they're very, very strict in, like, the purity culture. So boys and girls are not supposed to see each other naked. They're not supposed to hold hands. Your first kiss is supposed to be on your wedding day. What I was experiencing was so different than what we were being taught. And that was where I kind of had my brain could not comprehend, right? And then it got to a point where I started getting depressed. now that I've done a lot of processing, I understand that this is really common in abuse survivors because your brain does not comprehend the level of trauma that you're going through. And so when I was 14, I hit such, actually, so it started when I was 12, 13, and then I had an attempt when I was 14. And after my attempt, in my mind, and obviously, right, being in a very toxic, trauma-filled environment, this was the narrative that my brain came up with to be able to cope with everything. But I feel like, so I've been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and I feel like this was my first manic episode. So after I attempted, I had what I believe is my first manic episode. And I believed that God had saved me. There was a purpose for me to be on this earth. And it really did save my life, so to speak, because at that point I started looking for more, right? So now we're back up to, I'm 15 years old, I'm in college, and we're talking about, I graduated at 14 and I started college. And when I went into the college environment, it was just like my mind was alive. And it was so different. So going into that environment and kind of having some clarity for what is real in the world, right? Because you're in this brainwashed environment where it's such a, like, it's that far right, it's that purity culture, it's just that toxic environment, to seeing people who were not so hateful, who were not just terrible, terrible human beings. And then it was different because I remember walking through church, and you walk through the hallways in church, and it was commonplace to see mothers just beating their children in front of everybody. And I remember I went
physically beating them?
Yes.
Hitting.
Physically hitting children just in the hallways because they're talking in church or whatever. And the husbands would instruct the women to take them out and abuse them. And I remember walking down the hallways after going to college and getting some clarity. And I was like, it hurt my heart. In fact, I remember I actually reached out and yanked one of the women off of the kids because I was just so...
You were done.
I saw red.
Yeah. Well,
I was so angry.
So just for clarification again, and because I don't always understand how I'm going back to education. You said you went to college at 15. So I understand that you could graduate from being homeschooled, but what college would take you at 15? Is this a Mormon college?
No. So this is actually, so it's kind of interesting. So my dad, so this goes, and I actually tried to work with law enforcement on this, but they couldn't prove it because laws have not caught up to their terrible,
No.
their terrible activities. But so the high school that I went to is called Penn Foster High School. And I've looked into it for other people who may not have access to education, right? Like, so after I left, I worked with an organization called Holding Out Help to try to help other people leave. And so the high school is called Penn Foster Education. It allows you to enroll after 8th grade or take a placement test. And so for me, the order manipulated my transcripts to show that I had graduated 8th grade. I had not. I had not passed 8th grade. In fact, I hadn't passed 7th grade. But because it was coming from a school, then they were able to manipulate transcripts and say that I had passed the 8th grade. So I was allowed to enroll in this Penn Foster high school education program. And it's a completely online program. You never interact with any teachers. You never interact with... It's literally just them mailing you textbooks, you taking tests, and you passing all your credits, right? And it takes longer than if you were to just do a GED. But I think that my family would never have allowed a GED because it requires us to go to a public place, right? So the Penn Foster program really just let them stick me in a room and not have to deal with me.
So is basically when you were exposed to college, were you able to keep up with that level of education at that point? Was that something you were actually capable of doing at 15?
So that's a funny story. So after I graduated from the Penn Foster program, um, I applied for the Salt Lake Community College because that was the program, or that was where my dad was sending all of his girls, right? It's a community college, it's cheaper. And a lot of the reason my dad was sending us to school, I didn't realize this at the time, but he was sending us to college to take advantage of the Pell Grant. Because if you are, so when I showed my parents' income to apply for college, it showed that my mom had made $17,000 that year and she was raising 11 children. So we definitely qualified as being in a poverty level. So I went and applied for the college. We did the Penn Foster grant. And I did not keep any of that money. It went straight into my father's pocket. In fact, when I left, he actually claimed that I owed him about $2,000. And he had accumulated over $8,000. In fact, I actually calculated how much he owed me, and it was about $20,000 from working and him not allowing me to take any of my income when I left, from him taking all of my college grants. He took about $20,000 from me. So I started college at 15, and because Penn Foster is an accredited high school, I was able to show that I had a high school diploma and that I just graduated early, and we were able to start a Salt Lake Community College.
It just blows my mind that they can get away with. I mean, for you, that's, I guess, a great thing that you're in college. Do you feel as if you were ready for that at 15? It's a weird question. I know.
No, it's not weird at all, because I've actually seen other people. So for me, in my experience, I was very academically inclined. I've always enjoyed school. I enjoy learning. My personality is such that I wanted to go to medical school. I wanted to go to college. It wasn't.
You did mention that. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay.
So now when I went into college, I tested into the lowest math class that you can test into. I tested into an average English class, but that was just because I would secretly go to the library and read. So I learned how the English language works grammatically, right? And so English was not really a struggle for me, but the math was. And so when I went into the class, I did okay, just because I literally had nothing else to do, and I somehow am pretty good at research. And I think that was because I worked for my dad's law office for a while, and one thing that we did is I did research.
He was a lawyer?
My dad is actually, yes, he is actually a practicing lawyer. He's a real estate attorney, and he's passed the bar. Yes.
He should be disbarred, but okay, that's another story.
Yeah, I 100% agree.
I do have a quick question. First of all, I'm guessing school was probably a bit of an escape for you too, based on what you were experiencing and what was going on in the group, that it was a welcome escape from all of that. But
yes.
Are you comfortable, because I'm not sure that our audience is familiar with who your dad is, who the leader of the Kingston clan is. Are you comfortable saying his name?
Yes. Like I said, I wrote a book. His name is Paul Kingston, and he is still currently the leader. So it's not something that is really secretive. Yeah. We had a very interesting relationship growing up. And so for me, I'm not uncomfortable talking about him at all, just because I've worked through all of the trauma there, but it's not exciting to me to be to say, my dad trafficked me and then did all this but then I also don't want to be that person that's like he's just this terrible person or whatever. And there's absolutely zero good, because he is a terrible person, but everybody has good, I guess. But yeah. So
Okay, I'm actually Googling him now. I've heard the name because we've had other order people on, but I think this is the first time he's been outed. So thank you for that.
you're welcome.
Do you know how many children he has? I know you from your TikToks. I know he had 27 wives. Do you know the total count of children, or does he even know the total count of children?
I don't think he knows. When I counted, I was in the order. I was like 13, 14 years old. I was working at the office, and we kind of had a fun activity that we were going to count all of my dad's kids because he had more kids than anybody else. And I think we hit 315. And this was back when I was 13, 14, and I'm 36 now. So he had about 300. I would guess it's closer to 400 or 500 now.
Wow. That's crazy. Yeah. That's crazy. So
it says here that your dad took over the order from his father, John Kingston.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That is correct. Yes.
All right. So this was going on many decades before.
Yes. So the order actually started in the Great Depression. And it actually wasn't even my father's father. So it was not even my grandpa that started it. It was actually one of his brothers named Charles Eldon Kingston. He goes by Brother Eldon. So if you say Brother Eldon, most people in the group will know who you're talking about.
Okay.
And then he passed away, and it went to Ortel, who is my grandfather. And then it went to my father, who is Paul Kingston. And there was a huge battle, rift in the order at the time that my dad took over, because a lot of people believed that Ortel's brother Merlin should have become the leader instead of my father. But my father had a very tenacious mother who was very power hungry and did a lot to try to manipulate the situation to help her son gain power.
What? But she had 2 sons, so why she chose him?
So she actually had 8 sons.
Well, silly question. What a silly question.
So in my mind, I think, because a lot of people thought that Paul's brother Daniel, because he was older, should have gotten it. But as history went on, you see how intelligent LaDonna was in picking my father, because my father is he's very charismatic, right? He's done so much illegal activity and has never gone to jail for it. Whereas his brother, John Daniel, is very, he loses his temper at the drop of a hat. He isn't calculated in his decisions. He's terrible with money. He doesn't make very sound business decisions. Most of his companies didn't do very well until his brother Jesse actually came in and took over a lot of them in the operational perspective.
That was kind of like an obvious choice to go with. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, and that does make sense because you need a charismatic cult leader. You really do.
Exactly.
Like you said, just like she knew that he had the personality for it.
Exactly. In fact, they started grooming him when he was in high school, because I know he had a high school girlfriend. He had a very different path that he wanted to pursue. And his father told him, no, you're going to go to law school. You're going to marry Patty. You're going to do this, 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 and this. And then eventually, he was groomed to take over after his father passed.
I find it fascinating that your father, so he must, to become a lawyer, he would have to, do you know what school he graduated from? College?
So he went to, I'm pretty sure it was the University of Utah. So everybody there's, until they started sending people to medical school, everybody stayed in Utah. It was, in fact, you have a lot of the groups, the FLDS and the LeBaron group. You have all of those groups that went from state to state. The order never left the state of Utah until they needed doctors, and not everybody could get into the University of Utah. The University of Utah is one of the top medical schools in the U.S., or at least they were at the time that I was there. It could have changed. Then you have, they didn't really, my dad he stayed in Utah and he went up through that education system. And keep in mind, they didn't pull everybody out of school and get that controlled until my dad was in power. So when my grandfather was in power, they were actually pretty, I don't want to say liberal, right? They still had their far right ideology, but the kids were allowed to go to school. The high school students were allowed to date. None of that was eliminated until my father took power.
Interesting.
Do you think that was calculated on his part? Like, was that to gain more power, to have more secrets from the outside world? What do you know his motives for that?
Absolutely. I think so. I think a lot of it, if you look at John Daniel, that was when they started kind of engaging in a lot of the government fraud, right? Like my grandfather, he was indicted for I think it was either Medicaid or food stamp fraud, some kind of welfare fraud. And he ended up having to pay like almost 300,000 back to the government. And that's a lot of money during that time period. That's my grandfather's time period. And so I think with my dad, he wanted the power, and I think he learned a lot from the FLDS, right? You have Warren Jeffs that just completely closed them off. He put them on a compound, and he started just really having all of this control where he could just take wives and just like break up families and just put people wherever he wanted to and have there was no checks and balances to it. And I think that my father saw that and really kind of took some of that back to his own group because he wanted more power. He wanted more money. In fact, I've personally seen him just still like if you have so the way that the cult works, you don't inherit anything after your parents pass away. It goes to the cult. And I saw people who were members at the very end of their life, which means a lot of their children and their kids were not part of the order. And the order just took those homes and just took them from these people. So my father really, I don't feel like he has any empathy. I kind of think he is a narcissist. But
yeah.
but he just doesn't really care who his actions hurt. He really does just love that power and money.
Most, if not all of the leaders of all the cults that we've interviewed or the survivors, they're all narcissists. You have to be a narcissist to be a cult leader. I think it's just a prerequisite. As I said earlier, I Googled your dad and I have a lot of questions.
We'll be right back after a quick break.
Don't go anywhere. More Cultimatum is coming up. So I'm going to jump quickly here to something that you probably may get to or not get to, but I wanted to ask it. It says here that you were forced or they encouraged you to marry your cousin at 16.
Yes.
Want to talk about that?
Yeah. So I started college at 15 and I went through like life was semi-normal and enjoyable. Now I was molested and it really like took a damaging toll on my mental health when I was just before my 15th birthday. I remember it happened in August and I turned 15 in November. And so I was dealing with that mental health struggle, and I was also trying to go to college. And then on my 16th birthday, my father sat me down and he said, "It's time for you to get married. I'm going to go to China for 2 weeks and I need you make me a list of anybody that has danced with you that you think might be a good option." And at that point, I'm 16 years old. I dealt with sexual abuse my whole childhood. And the last thing in the world that I wanted was to get married. So he went to China and I did all of the things, right? I fasted, I prayed, I did all of the things. So when he said, make me a list, it kind of indicates that there's some choice there. I knew that that's not the case. So as I say that, I want to be careful because there wasn't a choice there. He was just trying to figure out where I was at and how easy it was going to be to get me to do what he wanted me to do. So he came back. I had no list. I did not want to get married. I didn't have any direction. I had fasted and prayed about it. And I remember thinking that this is that this is not where I'm supposed to be going with my life, right? I wanted to go to school. I wanted academia. So he came back and he had a conversation with me, and he said, was there anybody that you put on the list? And I said, I feel like God does not want me to get married right now. And he told me, that's the wrong answer. God does want you to get married, and I want you to fast and pray about it some more. So I agreed. I fasted and prayed about it, and I think a month went by before my mom came to me and she said, there's a guy that's going to come. And so the way that they say it in the group is, there's a man that had direction on you. He's already talked to your father, and your father's given him permission to talk to you. Now, what that means is there's a guy that your dad thinks would be a good option for you to marry, and you have to talk to him. You don't have a choice. And I told my mom, I'm not ready to get married. I've never had direction on this person. I didn't have any idea who it could have been even. And so my mom told me who it was. And I remember I felt just this drowning feeling, like I was not, like my life was not my own in any way, shape, or form. Like I was being forced. Like there's not, like, I don't even have the words to describe how terrible the feeling is. I just know that when I have really deep mental health struggles, that's the same feeling that I get, is that drowning feeling where like life just feels hopeless. Like I wanted to die. It was just like, there's not really, it's one of the lowest lows. And so I remember I ran out of the house. I ran across the street. I ran. And then when I couldn't run anymore, I sat down and I just started sobbing. And I knew nobody was coming after me. I knew that they were very confident that they were going to get whatever they wanted. And I just sat there and like my life was over. And so I processed through some of the feelings or whatever. And then I went back in the house, and my mom was in the laundry room doing laundry. She was taking clothes from the washer and putting them in the dryer. And I stood there. I just stood there. I didn't say anything. My face is all red. I'm sobbing. Right. And I asked her, I said, is there any way out of this, or do I have to do this? I can't remember exactly what I said. And she was like, and she came down on me and she said, you should feel so blessed that God has given you this opportunity. And I was like, I remember I was so angry with her. Like I wanted, like in that moment, I wanted her to die, because she was my mother. She was supposed to protect me. And she just completely turned her back on me.
She didn't console you. She wasn't no empathy. No. Okay.
No. So I remember, that weekend came and the guy showed up and he said, and I was sitting there and my mom was like, are you going to get ready? Like, are you going to dress up for this? And I was like, I'm a hostage here.
Did you know who was coming?
I did. I knew his name. We had danced at a dance together, but I had never had a personal conversation with him. I had never worked with him. I knew his name.
And this was a cousin.
Yes, he was my second cousin, and he was 11 years older than me, and I was 16. So he came to the house. He didn't come in. He didn't talk to anybody. My mom was just like, he's here. You have to go out and get in this vehicle with this man. And so I remember I went outside, and I remember thinking, am I supposed to sit in the back seat? Am I supposed to sit in the front seat? What am I supposed to do here? And so I remember he got out and he opened the front seat or the front door for me. And so I got in and I couldn't look at him. So because I knew who he was. We had danced together, but I had danced with so many guys, right? It was never anything personal. It was I didn't realize that our dances were really just a meat auction where men went to scope out the girls in the community, right? And so I get in his car and we're sitting there and it's just quiet and awkward. And he was like, and he kind of made a joke. He asked me, he asked me like something about work or something, or like said something that he thought was funny. I can't even remember what it was. And I was just like, yeah, like, and I was trying to be nice, right? And I remember we went to Sizzler restaurant and I didn't know, I'd never been to a restaurant, so I didn't know how to order. And he was like, well, what do you want? And I was like, I don't know. I've never been to like a restaurant. Like I've been to buffets where you get to go up and pick food, but I never had anybody bring me food. And so he was like, well, there's a salad bar. And I was like, okay, cool. Yeah, I'll do that. So I went up and like I got some salad and I sat down and we ate, and it was very, very light conversation. And then I got back in the car and he was taking me home and he said, well, I guess I should say the reason that I'm here. And he said, I had direction on you and I feel like we're supposed to get married. And I was like, and like, I didn't know what to say and I just told him, I was like, I have not had any direction. I do not feel like God has even spoken to me about anybody. And he was like, and like, he kind of was taken aback. And he was like, because I think he was really just expecting a yes. And I was just like, and I was still under the impression that some of this was my choice, right? Like not a whole lot, but if I said no, that meant no, right? And he was just like, well, okay. And he acted like he was upset with me. And I was like, okay, so I was not supposed to say no. Like that's when the realization hit me, like there was zero choice in this situation. So I got out of the car and I went back in the house. My mom was so excited. She was like, so how was it? All of this stuff. And I looked at her and I was like, what is happening right now? Like, I was like, why are you excited? Like, I'm literally being like, and I didn't understand this at the time, but like in my mind now looking at it, I'm like, I'm literally being trafficked by my parents. And she's so excited about it. Like, it's not really fitting the vibe.
Right. But let's be clear. Let's be clear. I'm sure your mom was brainwashed from the beginning of her time in the order to the point where this is what you're supposed to think you want. This is ingrained in you. This is what women in this group are groomed to do.
And I'm going to guess that that's how she married your father. She was chosen. Oh, he was something.
Yes. Yeah. In fact, she was actually 16 when she got married. And my father, yes, was, I think he's 8 years older than her.
Which wife is she in? He has several. Obviously, you said before how many wives he has. Do you know what number she is?
She's wife number 5. Yeah.
Okay. And
so when I look at the wives that married my dad, his first wife was 18. Then his second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth were all the ages of 14 to 17. It was actually very uncommon for them to wait for a girl to get married for a lot of years. Even I'm 17, so I'm 16 at this time. 16, it was the typical age to get married. If you were 17 and not married, you were old. You were called a noble maid, right? And so like as a 12 to 13-year-old, you're called a rosebud. 14 to 15 is a maid of honor, which is when they want you to get married. And then 16 to 17 is a noble maid. And then 18 is when you should be married and have kids.
And I'm just going to say, coming from a polygamous cult myself, the real reason for that is because they can groom these girls and they have a lot more control because these girls are young and naive and they don't even really like you said, they have no idea really what's going on or what's happening to them. And by the time they realize it, they're 3, 4, 5 kids in. They don't know. They are clueless.
Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, I've actually had a conversation with my dad, and he didn't say it in those words, but he kind of did, because I was like, why don't we just let them wait till they're 18? Like, it doesn't make sense to like take away their childhood, so to speak. And he told me, he was like, God has a lot more, they're a lot more impressionable. God has a lot more control over them before they turn 18 and they get wise to the ways of the world. And at the time I was like, that doesn't make sense. But now I'm like, no, he definitely, like, they're way easier to
Yeah.
brainwash. They're
Yep.
children, and legally they're up against a huge battle, because if they legally get married, they can't just get an annulment. They can't just get a divorce. It's so hard to get a divorce before they're 18 because they're pretty much owned by their husband. It's just transferring ownership from the father to the husband is what it becomes. And it's just,
And
it's,
by God, they mean the elders have a lot more control over these women because they haven't experienced girls, because they haven't experienced enough life to realize they're a victim.
exactly. Yep. And the longer they keep them in that victim mentality, the harder it is for them to get out. And the longer that it takes. In fact, so I've been watching The Handmaid's Tale, and I couldn't watch it for a lot of years because of how triggering it was, because it really feels it's so accurate to these cults.
Is it really? Because
Yeah,
I've
really,
watched
I've
first
watched it
season
too.
1. Yeah. Oh my God.
It is so like when I first started watching it and I watched like their ceremony, that actually happens in the FLDS. And I was like, I watched it, and I watched it probably, I want to say 7-8 years after I left, and I watched the first 10 minutes and I went into a full-blown panic attack.
Yeah, very triggering.
Yes. So as I'm watching it now, and I'm in a lot better place mentally. Like, even so, I watched an episode last night, and the commander's wife gave one of the handmaids a music box, and my mom gave me that same music box with that same song playing, and I was like, I had to take some deep breaths. I was like, wow. Like, I had to take some deep breaths. I was talking to my husband, and I was like, I've never heard that song since I've left. And it was just, it's
like,
really.
Did they read my journal? Like, how did they put this in the show?
I said that too. I was like, I feel like they literally just read my mind in the show.
That concludes part 1 of our interview with Nicole, one of the oldest daughters of Paul Kingston from the Order. You cannot miss part 2 next week. So here's Melody and I with the outro.
We want to thank Nicole for coming on and sharing part 1 of her story. Anybody listening, for our audience, stay tuned. Next week, you're going to hear the rest of Nicole's story.
Oh, yeah. And there's a lot more. There's another whole 45 minutes to, I didn't even count, but a whole part 2. So thank you, Nicole. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you again, Nicole. And as always, thank you to all of you for tuning into Cultimatum. We do appreciate your support in our mission to expose the truth and highlight the voices of these survivors.
If you're enjoying the show, don't forget to rate and review us on Apple and Spotify. And don't forget to follow, share, and keep listening to all of our latest episodes.
You can also follow Cultimatum on Instagram, TikTok, Pinterest, and YouTube for more content and updates.
Don't forget to join our Facebook group, Cultimatum Podcast, where we dive deeper into these important topics.
And if you are a cult survivor and you're looking for additional support, we do recommend joining the Cult Escape and Healing group on Facebook.
If you're interested in more of my work, and I didn't tell Melody this, but I also just bought a new domain. So the Anonymous Andrew Podcast Studios.com is now up and available. I forgot to tell you that. So, but it takes you to the same website. So AnonymousAndrewPodcast.com or AnonymousAndrewPodcastStudios.com is where you can go and find all the
all 3 podcasts
that we do.
Yes.
Yeah, all 3 podcasts.
Yes. And if you have a story related to cults or human trafficking that you'd like to share on Cultimatum, please email us at cultimatumpodcast@gmail.com.
Want to support the show? You can help us cover production costs by buying us a cup of coffee. Just follow the link in our show notes.
And as always, stay safe, stay informed, and remember, you are not alone.